Well, welcome, Stephen Michaud.
Good to see you again, Doris. How are you today?
All right. Stephen, you are a best-selling investigative journalist and author, on tour right now with your latest book called Robert's Story. Tell us a little bit about what this story is about.
Well, Robert East was a Texas rancher, born about 1915, and a member of a very prominent Texas ranching family. Raised on the family ranch in deep South Texas, and later became the head of the ranch at the death of his brother about the time of World War II. Robert was not much of a cattleman, but he was a great cowboy. And the two things that he wanted to do in life, and the only two things he seemed to ever want to do in life, was chase around after cattle and skirts. But about halfway through his life, his older brother Tom died suddenly, and Robert was left in charge of this enormous 250,000 acre ranch, and he had practically no idea how to run it.
Wow. Okay. And then what happened?
Well, what happened is that Robert might have succeeded had he had a more congenial personality, but he had wanted and waited all his life to run the ranch. And so when he got it, he wasn't going to take any help or any directions from anybody. The problem with that is that the ranch was and is out in the middle of nowhere, and Robert didn't have the skills or the experience to run it. On top of that, about the year 2000, an enormous gas well came in on the ranch, and Robert went from being simply rich to being enormously rich. He was earning as much as $12 million a month from this single well. This created interest in people who wanted to take it away from him, aware that Robert was by himself, alienated from his family, and not particularly bright. So first his foreman and then his attorneys began slowly to isolate Robert from his family and from the rest of the people that he knew, and also at the same time rewriting his will and the rest of his estate papers. So by the time Robert came into his early 80s, he was old, he was infirm, he was all alone, and there was nowhere for him to turn.
Wow. And so then he died? How did he die?
Well, part of the program to keep him isolated was to bring a doctor out to the ranch who supposedly was to take care of him, but in fact achieved quite the opposite. So in the early months of the year 2007, Robert took a turn for the worse. He did not have much time to live. And so the only real hero in this story was a young Mexican boy, a teenager, who had been brought to the ranch from Mexico to be Robert's caretaker. He didn't speak any English, and he was here. He was in Texas illegally, and really didn't know quite what to do about anything. He was afraid if he came forward with what he was seeing, Robert's abuse, that he would be arrested and sent back to Mexico by the border patrol. And of course, he didn't speak any English. His name was Ramiro, and Ramiro had one idea, and it was a brilliant one. He had a cell phone, and he began turning it on when he was around Robert, because he was afraid if Robert took a fall or died suddenly, that he would be blamed for it. Robert would, in the middle of the night, have nightmares. Robert fell every now and again. And then it occurred to Ramiro, however, that if he had had this recorder that he could record what was being done to Robert. And he had the added advantage of that, being a young Mexican who spoke no English, he might as well have been a stick of furniture in the big house. And he was able to move fairly quietly, unobserved, unseen, unnoticed, all around Robert, while the people who were taking advantage of him were denying Robert decent medical care, were discussing very freely among themselves what they planned to do in securing and keeping the ranch and all of Robert's money, so that by late that month, and this is the first and second month of 2007, Robert or Ramiro rather, had a full story about Robert, which he took to Robert's nephew, Mike East, and that became the end of the plot. Unfortunately, it came too late to save Robert or to save the ranch.
Wow. Okay. And there's been a lot of questionable activity going around that you have discovered in writing this book, but we won't go into that because it's all in the book. Unless you want to add a little something to that. Well,
what I can add without going on into a lot of detail is that with a lot of work, I found that some documents that had previously not been known about or ever shared with anyone. I found them, and they dramatically reveal how slowly but relentlessly one piece of paper after another was altered to change Robert's will, his will, that is what he wanted, and his will, to one that favored the wolves, as we call them in the book,
right.
So that at his death in 2007, he had basically everything had been taken away from him. He was literally penniless. All of it had been shifted over to these other people, and part of that, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's a little complex, but by that time, his family was being barred, not just discouraged, but being barred from seeing him at his ranch. There was an armed guard at the gate who wouldn't let them in. And at the very end, the only way they could get to see him was to sign away their interests as well. So they were able to see Robert for the last 5 or 6 days of his life. He died alone in his bed at home.
Wow. Okay. Well, you've written many impressive books yourself, including the Ted Bundy series. What are some of the titles of the books that you have published?
Oh my gosh, I'm too old. I can't remember them all anymore. Well, probably the best known is The Only Living Witness, the first book I did with Hugh Ainsworth way back when, and then a couple more Ted Bundy books, and then I wrote a couple of books with the late Roy Hazelwood, who was one of the founders of the FBI's profiling unit, and then let me see. Let's go forward to a couple more. I helped Beck Weathers, a doctor in Houston, rather not Houston, a doctor in Dallas, tell his story of climbing Mount Everest and being left for dead, which is the title of the book, near the top of the mountain. I don't know if I can go bore
No, that's good. That's good.
Right.
What would you like readers to take away from reading Robert's story?
Well, the key story in the end is adult abuse. Robert was old. He was infirm. He didn't really have all his senses. Never did really. And so he was really easy prey for these people. But he's also, though, an object lesson, because Robert was rich, I mean, beyond belief. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He wasn't just rich, he was really, really rich. And that money did him no good whatsoever. He would have done much better in this world had that great big well of gas not ever been brought in, because it made him a target. It put a target on his back. Old people in this country, I'm not going to speak about the rest of the world, as they age, have less and less protection against those who would do them harm, or those who simply want them out of the way. And this is one of the lessons of this book, as all of us baby boomers start reaching Robert's age, is that you're alone, and you can't necessarily trust people. And the safety net that is supposed to be there to help older people, rich or poor, has holes in it, and it's a scandal. It's a nationwide scandal about how we treat our old people.
Right. And so anyone can read the full story, the full Robert story, anywhere where books are sold, I suppose.
Absolutely. Or, I'll buy it on the internet, go to your bookstore. It's out there, ready for you to buy it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stephen Michaud.
Thank you, Doris. It's always good to chat with you.